Welcome to Seedsman Strain Sessions. We are talking about some basic stuff like usual, but today in particular, we're going over some things that, in my opinion, more growers should know about. It becomes a headache when you phenohunt, when you look for dank genetics, when you try to find the best, but then you lose it because you can't maintain it. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about maintaining your genetics, keeping them from propagation techniques, all the way from cloning, self-pollination, and even tissue culture.
Yeah, this is a great conversation, particularly with the price of genetics these days. I think it's a great way to try to save a little money and try to maintain something that you're really excited about, something that really speaks to you. You find that one, you find that holy grail, if you will, and it's like, well, how do you hang on to those genetics for the future? This is going to be a great conversation, and a huge shout out to Seedsman for putting us on, man. If anybody wants to check them out, you can use Chris,
Sessions.
Thank you.
I know. Sessions. I saw it behind the glasses.
Yeah, it was like
he was like, "Wait, hold on." It's tough when we all have our own codes. You know?
Yeah, promo code sessions. So thank you, Seedsman, for putting us on, so we can have a conversation about this.
Yeah,
I feel like the Blue Oyster Cult or Blues Traveler Band or whatever with the harmonica by microphone, but it's not quite a harmonica.
That's awesome, nice. Actually, yeah.
I really like it. So, fellas, you guys have hunted phenos over the years, of course. Have you just gone seed after seed, or do you like to maintain the clones? And seemingly the Canadian boys are a little different in terms of the processes, I've noticed. But, Scrogger, starting with you, what do you normally do when you find a keeper?
Well, lately, in the last 5 years or so, I haven't really been keeping my keepers. I just kind of I grow them out, and then I just finish it and I start another genetic. I don't really keep my genetics right now, but I used to do clones before everything became legalized. I would actually find a keeper and I would keep a clone of that, right? And I would grow it all throughout the year because it was hard to come by genetics back then unless it was bag seed. I'd get a lot of bag seeds, and that's what I would run, is always bag seeds, man. I would always run that. Find a good one, keep it, my mom and I, right? Nowadays, I don't really keep too much because I kind of feel like there's a lot of seed banks out there that I can find what I need to find, or you just collaborate and share with other growers and cultivators and just ask each other hey man, can I get a cut of yours? Or give you a cut of mine? So it's a lot of swapping and stuff. I never got into doing anything tissue culture, so I'm actually excited for this episode so I can learn some more and just maybe start doing some of that kind of stuff in the future here.
Dude, that's one thing about whenever we collaborate, boys, there's always things I learn in the episodes. I'm sharing my insights, but every episode, no matter if it's from the stash, if it was our show on AC, if it's Scrog School, I learn a piece out of it from somebody's techniques or somebody's approach. And that's something I didn't even think about maintaining the genetics, is swapping clones with somebody, having a friend or a gromie who can maintain the genetics for you potentially. So you can go back and get more and be like, hey, dude, remember that cut I gave you? You still running that? Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Boom.
There's always a friend who's always running the same thing, and you can always go back to them and be like, hey man, you still have that? I want that again, you know?
Yeah, it was actually Todd McCormick that we were talking to a few months back that said that he had somebody running his genetics and was able to go back to that guy years later and say, still got it? And said, yep, and was able to run with it. I can't remember if it was the Northern Lights or the Haze, but spreading out your seeds is a great way to maintain your genetics.
Yeah, no diddy.
Plant. Yeah,
for the plant. Just for the plant.
For
the
plant.
If you're listening, keep your mind out of the gutter. Okay, Seedsman Strain Session.
But yeah, when we generally talk about cloning, I think cloning is a great way to start when it comes to preserving your genetics, particularly when it comes to trying to find what you like before you're able to sample it. Generally, you can't really sample anything as it's going through the flower, and you're just going off of terpenes, you're just going off of maybe some stem rubs and structure and so on and so forth. So if you clone that plant before it heads into flower, you're already prepared should that genetic turn out to be something exciting, and you can go back and start turning maybe one of those clones into a mom and so on and so forth. So cloning a great way to start when it comes to preserving genetics.
Dude, it's a prime example of our FTS and Swank Genetics collab. right now, currently, myself and you, we're both just cloning blindly, essentially. We're phenohunting, so we're taking these clones to make sure we preserve the phenotype that we like, not knowing if we like it or not. So sometimes I feel, depending again, if you're worried about plant count or if you have that issue, taking more than necessary is good because you're making sure that you're going to keep this. You may end up running it through and realize, damn, this is a fire one, and having more than less is going to be ideal. I've had times before where I didn't take a good one, and it was just a wispy little cut, and it didn't turn into a strong enough plant that I felt it could be a mother. So I grew that one out and then took that cut, grew that one out, and it just took way too long to maintain that genetic. So sometimes taking more earlier on is the better option, and then you could just cull them later.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for me, I ended up,
sorry.
I used to do a lot of cloning back in the day, kind of like Troy. Not so much anymore, although now that we're working on that FTS Swank collaboration, I'm doing cloning again. But I've had so many genetics over the years where I didn't clone and I grew them out and they were amazing. And I basically kind of hit myself in the head here, wishing that I had cloned them out and they were never preserved, right? So I lost so many good genetics just by not doing the cloning process. And it's one of the more beginner ways to preserve genetics, right? Cloning, mother plants, keeping those around. That's another way to conserve. Then you kind of get into more advanced things like, tissue culture. Some people store pollen, put in the freezer, for example, DNA sequencing. So there's like further things down the line you can do to preserve genetics. But yeah, when it comes to just talking about cloning, focusing on that, I do it from time to time. I've done it more years ago. But yeah, it's definitely, I think pretty much most common way that people do to preserve genetics, I feel like.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's important to note too, because you make up a really good point, Chris. And this is something that I struggled with when I first started. Was I wasn't cloning. Well, you said you were. I wasn't. However, if I did get that smoke that I really, really liked, and I did not have a clone, you can re-veg those plants and turn that plant from a 12-12 light cycle to either an 18 and 6 or 24 hours. Put it back on a veg cycle within 6-8 weeks. It takes a long time, but you're going to see that plant re-veg and then start over again. So now you have another opportunity to maintain those genetics and preserve them on that same plant. So if you do miss something, re-vegging is a quality option as well.
Dude, I didn't even think about that. Putting together the notes for this episode, that wasn't even on the list. Having a friend keep it and re-vegging, those are two things I've done in the past, and it was kind of last-ditch effort for that one, but some people will see better results doing that. It will take longer to revert it back, but the monster cropping method, so to speak, you can see some crazy fat yields, but I noticed they do look a little mutated when they get into that point, and it does take longer. Some people who have the plant count limit, that's the best way for them to do it, is to be able to just take that same plant, cut it low, and put it back into veg. And if you can do that, that's great. But I do think it's a little more complicated for some people. They quit because they don't see the growth after 3-4 weeks. I've had a month before and I didn't see any new green growth. And I'm like, dude, what are we doing? And
it's taken me 6 weeks, like 6 weeks, 6+ weeks to see growth. And then when it comes out, it's all mutated.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is what have I done? It's quick to be able to lose confidence. Yeah.
I've pulled the extra bud that's on the plant off, and I've noticed that it starts to grow a little bit quicker. It's almost like it doesn't know if it needs to keep growing the flower or if it needs to grow veg now. And part of me feels that total bro science, but that pruning of the additional remaining flower that's stuck on there for that re-veg has helped me move faster.
Yeah, so just a, a quick pro tip, which is super basic, but if you are cloning multiple mothers, make sure you label those clones, because I've made that mistake before when I didn't label my clones properly, and like all of a sudden I had like 40 clones. I'm like, holy fuck, I have like 3 mothers here, 40 clones. I should have been labeling as I went. I just thought like if I put them aside So that's something that you should really, really remember to do, is just keep everything labeled, and documentation, man. Documentation is a big thing
Dude,
for
it's
sure.
so
You
easy.
can even number your clones, and like, there's so much you can do to clones to try to like get the better ones, the bigger ones. When you guys clone a plant, where do you typically cut? Like, where would you cut the mother if you're cloning a plant?
That's a good question. I'm the king of saying take your top to do that. I always say just cut the top and do that. But I'm also the king of saying low stress train and don't top. So then where do you take your top? Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll work on that low stress training, and then as I'm cleaning up the bottom a little bit, that's where I'll start to take some cuts. But then I also will wait until it grows up more and I get a nice canopy, and I'll see just areas that aren't quite up there, but they're hardy. I've noticed if you take a stronger cut, if it's thicker, it may take a little longer to get roots, but it does start hardier. If you got a bigger, stronger stem and a hardier, healthier plant, it's going to be that when it grows.
Yeah, so how many branches would you guys be looking for? Like, I typically go for, like, say, the main little stalk that you would cut, and then like 3 side branches. I try to aim for at least 3 side branches on each clone when I was used to be doing it. Some people like just go for like just one top branch, right? I try to get a few branches on mine myself.
It's smart. Doing just one, man, your success rate, depending how you clone, especially like clone domes, I feel are more forgiving. But aeroponics, you get a little sludge on there, you get a little nasty, and all of a sudden a bubble cloner, and it's ruined. And if you only had one, it's tough. If you're getting pathogens into that cut already, you may just want to kill it off, and then your plant's in flower and you're taking a cut that's going to be a reverted cut. So it's smart to do multiple. I never do them when they're that young. I let the plant grow. I'm low stress training it, and I let it grow a bit. And then once it's kind of hardier, that's when I take the cuts. So it's like I've got enough to take it so I can still veg the plant.
Same.
Yeah,
Like
I'm
a
waiting
nice,
like
big,
4+
healthy bud.
weeks before I'm taking clones, and I take clones from any part of the plant. I mean, you could really take it any part of the plant and be successful. I know back in the day there was old school bro science stuff saying that there are more hormones on the bottom part of the plant. So when you take those cuts, you have a higher chance of rooting. Now, come to find out that people say it's the opposite. It's the upper part of the plant has the more hormones. So, I don't know which one is for sure, but what I do know is that you can clone from either section of the plant and still be successful. And when I usually do it is I will wait till at least 4, 5, 6 weeks the plant's been growing in veg. The plant's got to be at least, a foot tall, maybe 2 feet tall. Then when I do my cleaning up of lollipopping, so I'm removing that lower third growth, lower fourth growth, whatever. I also look at branches that aren't kind of making it up to the top of the canopy, right? They're kind of lagging behind. Maybe they're half the height. I take those ones off and use those as clones. So I feel like that kind of helps speed things up a little bit as far as me not taking off the top.
Smart, dude.
People are
Smart.
big on that. The top is going to be slower, and I myself I've seen way better growth from that big thick top. You know what I'm saying? Hardy roots growing just as fast, but just a big abundance of roots. So total bro science, in my opinion. And yeah, it's my personal experiences, but taking those tops is just one cut you're going to get at that point. Taking multiple from those bottoms that a lot of people are like, man, I feel like shit when I'm throwing away all this. It's like, well, don't turn it into clones.
Smart. No, I like that, and I can't add a whole lot to what you guys have already said. So I think maybe we'll move on. We talked about re-vegging, talked to cloning. Chris, you briefly mentioned storing pollen. What steps? I personally have never done this, so legitimately, I'm asking, what steps do you take to store pollen?
Well, harvesting pollen can be kind of a pain. I've done it a couple different ways to where break off a branch and drop it onto a piece of aluminum foil, for example, then scrape up all the pollen from the aluminum foil, slowly like separating the pollen sacs that are mixed in, then putting into a bag. I would use a plastic bag. A lot of people use glass containers, for example, but I would put it into a plastic bag and then put it in my fridge. And people say it only lasts 3 to 6 months or something like that. I've used it after a year. I tried using it and it still worked. And that's just in the fridge. Now, some people are also going to freeze it instead. They'll take the male pollen, they'll put it in their freezer to try to preserve it. I don't know how long that lasts. Some people say months, some people say years. But, again, that's a way you can kind of preserve the genetics. If you have a male that's a keeper, a stud, right? Something real vigorous, real great flower stacking or whatever, you really want to keep this. And you don't have a female that you need to work with right away. Well, go ahead and harvest that pollen. keep in your fridge if it's going to be a short-term thing, or look to freeze it, and then you could potentially bring that back and use it at a future date.
And I ended up putting mine in the freezer and did that painful, stressful process of extracting pollen. But what I ended up doing is I took a plant and I cut like a big fat cola off, and then I put that into water. Shout out to the homie Swank Genetics. He said that it'll still mature if you keep changing the water consistently, like you would with a clone. And so I did that every couple of days. I'd change the water, and that plant kept maturing. And eventually, it opened and it busted. I had 2 cups separate with 2 different plants, and they busted all over parchment paper. And then I just shook them off a little bit, took it out of there, separated majority of those little sacks, which sucked. I hit up Chris. I was like, "Hey, do you remove all of yours?" He's like, "Yeah, I try to do my best." It's like, all right, whew. I'm over here, hour 3 with tweezers, pulling one by one by one. But I think that the method of preservation of keeping the genetics to breed with them is one that's very long-term thought process. It's going to take more time than something like potentially self-pollination. So, doing the chemical induced self-pollination to the female, and then you can get female seeds and you could run those more versus getting the male growing out a female, then breeding those. You'll be able to keep it, but you may potentially get a slight different variation depending on the male that you have too, because you're getting more recessive traits that may come depending how far on down the line you are on the seeds that you got. So it's like, depending on how you go about it and how much space you have, self-pollination is definitely a good one. I myself don't have any quality experience doing it. I failed when I did mine. And I think it was because I did it too early. I sprayed a little too early. Chris, do you have any experience self-pollinating plants?
I'm in the process right now, actually. And one thing to mention before I answer that is another tip for separating the pollen sacs from the pollen. Look into buying a trim bin where it has the screen. And what I was doing, I was dropping those on there before, and then the pollen drops down through the screen, keeps the pollen sacs up on the screen, and that can kind of scrape it, just like you would typically if you were trimming plants on that trim bin, and you've got the trichomes that fall through, right, that screen, and then you can scrape that up. Similar thing. So I figured I'd mention that one.
Dude, I took one of those little the sifter like spoon things and put it through there, and they just were falling through. It wasn't fine enough. I wish I would have used that. Great tip.
Yeah. In regards to kind of self-pollinating, yeah, I mean, we're getting into breeding when we talk about this. STS spray is what I'm currently experimenting with a little bit. I found a solution made by Khalifa Genetics. Now, you can also do colloidal silver, which I don't have experience with, but I can speak about STS spray, which is, I'm pulling up the notes right here. Okay, so basically you're going to use silver nitrate, and then you're going to use sodium thiosulfate pentahydrate. And I think there's a sodium thiosulfate without the pentahydrate. Anyways, you're going to basically take 500 milliliters of distilled water, put it into a jar. Then you can add 0.5 grams of the silver nitrate, swirl that around until it dissolves in there. And that's your part A solution. Then you're going to take 500 milliliters of distilled water into a separate jar and put 3.9 grams of sodium thiosulfate pentahydrate. If you're using the regular sodium thiosulfate, I forget what the amount is. I want to say it's like 2 grams or 2.5 grams. You'd have to look it up and cross-reference. But you'll basically swirl that into the jar for a minute, and then you've got your part B solution. Then from there, you take basically an even amount of A and an even amount of B and put them into one container, and that's your STS spray. So I typically take about 30 milliliters of part B, put it in the cup, then you put in the part A. So you kind of reverse it, apparently. And then you'll swirl it all together. You want to make sure that the spray bottle, whatever, is kind of either has that amberish colors, because light can really harm the solution. So either have like an amber color bottle where the light's not impacting it, or cover it in aluminum foil, which is what a lot of people do. And I did that for my solution A and solution B as well, and then store those into the fridge. And then when you're spraying the plant, you typically start 1 week before flipping to your receiver plant into flower, right? So I've got a plant right now that I've been spraying. Some people say spray every 3 days. Some people say every 4 days. Some people say every 5 days. I've heard some people say, indica every 5 to 6 days, hybrids every 4 days, sativas every 3 days. I don't know if there's any legitimacy to that. I've just been spraying every 3 days. I'm starting to see it reverse now. You really need to spray like the bud sites and nodes You don't need to spray the leaves in that case, and you want to spray in the dark as well. And yeah, general tip would be to spray multiple plants. Don't just spray one in case it doesn't reverse, right? You don't want to put all your chips in one basket, spraying down this plant. It never ends up reversing. You've already flipped your receiver plants into flower. Now you're SOL, right? You're shit out of luck. You're not able to spray those receiver plants, and then those plants are going through flower. You hope that you either have clones of those and you can kind of restart over, or revert back to that re-vegging process. So yeah, spraying multiple plants at once is just a common tip that could help you there.
Dude, that's where I goofed up. Is I think I waited until I saw pistils forming, and then I started spraying, and it got basically just a herm plant out of it. Like I had like 3 viable seeds, and it just didn't mature long enough. And then I also, at the time, was ignorant and didn't realize that I needed to grow the plant longer than a mature bud. I was looking at mature flower as if I was harvesting for flower and not mature seeds. So there was a big confusion in that sense. But I think it's a great way to keep your favorite genetics by doing that, because essentially, if you don't have the space for a clone, you could just keep running this over and over and over. You don't have, or for a mother plant, you could just keep running it consistently, and then eventually just get a stock of the seeds to keep those going. But then if you're going to continuously keep hunting and you're looking for more genetics, there's other things that you may want to do that could be more long-term, like tissue culture. If any of you fellows got into any tissue culture at all?
Yeah,
No?
as a matter of fact, no, I'm using this massive lab in the back. It's real big. It's pretty, no, of course not. Tissue culture, I think, is the future when it comes to maintaining genetics indefinitely. That's, I think, the advantage, huge advantage of tissue culture. As long as the environment is sterile, you can harbor these tissues for almost as long as you can keep the environment stable. And
Oh yeah.
that's amazing. That's amazing. That's the future, because it's not only like it's the smallest form. You know, you can store so much genetics in petri dishes stacked on top of each other than you could by having thousands of seeds or thousands of clones or thousands of plants. You could have thousands of tissues in just a small sample size. I'm the most excited about it, but I also know very little about the actual science that goes into it.
Dude, it's crazy to see that stuff, man. There's people do it, like there's the small Athena tissue kits now, or tissue culture kits now, so people can do it at home. But the people that I know doing it has always been in commercial grows, and they work with other labs. It was wild when I was a director of a place and we started doing that, and I saw our propagation area, and there was just a rack, and we had 30 genetics on a shelf, and it was just in the corner, and I was like, wow, that little stack over there's 30. It's all of the genetics in the whole place. Like, yep. But it was one of those deals where we couldn't touch it for months. You know, this is going to take a long time. But by being able to take a piece of the stem or a tiny portion of the plant, a piece of the leaf, not even a clone itself, and to be able to put this in a small vial with, you know, nutrient-rich gel, essentially, it's so simple but complicated in the sense of the science behind it, and cleanliness and everything being sterile isn't as easy for us home growers usually. So it's about creating a separate environment. Those who are into growing the organies, or the old psilocybin, will say, may understand a little bit more, but they'll utilize the laminar flow hood, which can help them in that process of making sure it's the cleanliness and sterilization is done right in their work environment. So this is like the next level of home grower science, where if you can do that, you have preservation for your genetics for a long time. No need for a mother plant room. It's
You
a
also
tissue
eliminate
culture corner.
pests.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
every other
Pathogens
way,
and disease and everything.
yeah, everything is eliminated. Pathogen, yep, everything's eliminated. Whereas maintaining clones, mother plants, they're all susceptible to the environment. Whereas I guess tissue culture is also susceptible to the environment, but it's not susceptible to the same effects, negative effects, disease, pathogens, pests as plants are. So it's very exciting. And quite frankly, I didn't know Athena had a home grower tissue culture kit, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, dude, that's next level.
Yeah, it's like a nice little black. It looks like what you said, P. When you're like, I have a lab. It's almost like a mini lab, man. It's like a briefcase, and it has a whole bunch of little storage containers. It has all directions. It's pretty amazing. I think I want to get one and just start learning and playing around.
Little Polly Pocket for
yeah, pretty much, because that is the way. like what you said also, like that's the future, man, because it's like you can store so much in such a little place, and you already know what you're going to get. And it's like you said, you can take out all of the bugs, all of the anything bad in the plant, you pretty much get rid of and just preserve it for a long, long, long time. So
Yeah, dude. And then if let's say you've got something like powdery mildew or HLVD or any of these systemic situations, you can utilize tissue culture to get that out of there. It'll take longer than the rooting process, and you won't be hardening it off to reuse again. You'll be just taking it and putting it back through the tissue culture process. But from what I understand, you can rework this over time. And that's a huge thing for those wanting the keepers. In a commercial space, by the time you get it done with, that genetic's not hot anymore. However, us home growers, I'm ready to grow something from the 70s, So had somebody kept a tissue culture lab with some of these cultivars available for us to get that were strong and ready to go, dude, we'd be all over it. But the biggest issue is preservation is one thing, but then hardening them off and transitioning into growing them again is another. And that's where I've seen, in commercial settings at least, a lot of people fail. So they'll work with labs that do that for them and then bring them this little nubby plant that's ready to essentially be a clone, but it's just out of like seedling size. So it can be done, but I'm a little too simple to trust myself to do that. So even with a kit at home, I'd probably still partner with a company that's doing it. But I think that's going to be the future of preservation for sure.
That Athena kit is $1,800 right now.
Oh, so that's it?
Priced a little bit out of the hobbyist price level, right?
Yeah, that's somebody who's pushing clones or something.
It's the first to market thing. I'm assuming Athena is the only or one of the only brands that have released this to the home grower market.
It is. And also, if you think about it, though, like people buy like tent kits and all that shit for like almost $1,000 too, right? Almost, right? So if you can like store all your favorites in a little tiny space, like it's almost worth it if you're like a real person like that loves to do that stuff. Like I'm not there yet myself, but some people just love to store all that kind of stuff and have all those toys and like, just because it is a first like piece is, so it's probably that's why it's expensive. Once other people start coming out with them and it gets more popular, right?
Things it's like Canatrol versus V-Cure,
Yeah.
It eventually we'll see another one that comes out that makes the price even more affordable for the people. I think when you look at buying an autoclave and a laminar flow hood, it's not practical for most people. But when you get something that's put into a kit, it may be a little more of an approachable thing. But those are, again, that's the next level of hobbyist. You're taking it to a new level. You're a geneticist. You're becoming the hobby is going to the next level. And I think we're getting there over time. And as science evolves and it becomes something that's more practical for people at home, it's going to be a great way to do it, because self-pollination, cloning, mother plants, all these things take space, and it also goes against your plant count. And it's also something that does take a little bit more money to maintain, because that space needs lights and potentially tents and air cooling and all these things that essentially will make it so your cost may be comparable to investing into something for tissue culture. But that process and how long it takes versus a clone is night and day. I can get a clone out, 7 to 14 days, depending on the process and the genetics. Some genetics, I don't know if you guys have ran into that, but some genetics take for fucking ever, man. They like to the point where I think there's an issue. I got rid of 3 of my favorite genetics in the past because they were super, super finicky to clone. And those ones probably would have been the tissue culture ones. You put it through there.
Yeah, perhaps. I'm not too sure of the wizardry that goes on with tissue culture, as I stated. However, at $1,000, I'm kind of with Troy on this one. I'm out. However, $1,000 does seem steep, but I can almost justify it at the same time, where it's like we got guys paying hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars for genetics, and then that's just one genetic. Maybe you want to store many genetic. Like first to market, so yep, they're gonna dictate the price. I don't know the wizardry that goes on in tissue culture, so the gel, all that stuff. I don't know. Is that maybe that's not cost effective? Maybe that's expensive to create. I have no idea. I'm sure it's not. It's probably just a hormone. I have no idea. But it's like, yeah, as we see the industry continue, I think it's safe to say that A, that price will drop, but B, we're going to see more people jumping on to just be a part of preserving genetics, because we've all seen good genetics either get turned into something people don't really like anymore, or B, just fall off the map altogether. And that's a horrible price to pay, losing good genetics.
when you look in a sense of like, if you have something stable, since I've known UP, you go to the next genetic, the next genetic, the next genetic. But you've gone back and popped them, and they weren't the same flavor. They weren't the same dankness of the past. Some people, they like that hunt and that mystery and trying new things. So I think they're all for preservation, is as long as the company still has it, as long as Seedsman still has it available with the discount code sessions, they're going to keep getting it. But other people, it's like they have a seed vault. They got a stock. And I've become one of those people, not even intentionally. Just every time I see a good deal, Seedsman dropped something new. One of the breeder, Chris, got something. He's got a collab with somebody. I'm like, damn it, I got to get it. And it's like, I'm keeping these over time. So then it's like, let's say we have a seed stock. How do you preserve that? Mine are just sitting there. Luckily, my basement's pretty optimized in my lung room. But can you just grab a bunch of packs and let them sit in your hot office and upstairs? Or like, how do you guys keep seeds long term? And
Like
nobody's talk first.
Oh, I
Um,
to be honest with my seeds, I just keep them in like my basement in a nice cold, like not a fridge or anything. I just keep them in a dark, not damp, but kind of cool environment. I just store them under there with zero light exposure. And I've never had like I've had beans not pop, but like I can like still pop beans from like probably 10 years ago that I have, and I bet I get a few to run for sure. That's how I do it myself.
For me, yeah, I have it in a box, dark. I try to put it in a cool place. However, most of the time it's room temperature. And I think you hear about the textbook way of going about things, but oftentimes you can do things a little bit outside of the textbook and still get away with it. So I've been able to store at room temperature, maybe slightly below room temperature oftentimes, and it's been fine. I know of tons of people who have put it in their fridge. They've also put them in freezers. There's a lot of controversy behind there because there is moisture that gets involved and that could cause the seed to sprout. So I personally avoided putting it in a fridge or a freezer, but some people do opt to do that. But trying to get it as the temperature as low as possible without freezing it, I think is normally what people will go after.
I've
I
seen
think the
people use
key.
bags with the silica gel, those silica gel packs from like you get with clothing or shoes and you order online, shit like that, and they'll load them in there and put it in the freezer.
The key is when it comes to germinating a seed, you need water and light. I'm not like, obviously you need ideal temperatures, but it's like I personally don't see how the temperature within moderation, like room temperature versus like a minus or like a, I can't put this into freedom units, so I can only use Celsius. So it's like 20 degrees Celsius, which is like 70 freedom units, and that's room temperature. It's like I as long as there's no water and no light, I don't think temperature as a variable alone is enough to produce germination. Now, too hot, would that then dull or make a dud of a genetic? I think that's plausible. But room temperature, I think, is certainly fine, just as long as you're avoiding light and water.
Yeah, you'd think because there's life in that seed. You know what I'm saying? So you don't want any extreme conditions, obviously. But I think that's a big point is moisture. More than anything is you want it to be in a dry, environment. You want them to stay dry, obviously. But that oxygen, like being exposed to oxygen, do you guys ever think that's an issue at all where the seeds kind of dry out and the internal components of it shit the bed? Because older seeds, man, I've had seeds that are way old that I've still popped, but I've had the germination rates be really, really bad. As we're brand new, healthy, fresh seeds like the FTS Swank collab, the Chill Out OGs, they're newer. You know what I'm saying? They're only a year old, maybe, and they all germinate like crazy. Do you think age has to do with it or storage has to do with it?
Well, if you're like, I'd say if you're like storing them and you said oxygen's getting in there and it's like in an open kind of environment, the only thing that I can think would mess it up is how much humidity is in that space, right? If it's like super, super humid, like that might maybe put a little bit of a damper on the issue. But if it's like not crazy humid and there's going to be not much moisture, then I think they'll be fine for a while myself.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I totally agree. I think the majority, the ideal is dark, cool location. What is cool? I just think room temperature and slightly below, or maybe even just a little bit above. There's a margin of error. So yeah, and we say this with how many years of experience of really maintaining genetics for a length of time. I'm going to say we're all too young to really know what is a long time storage. You know, maybe ask us in 30 years how we stored our genetics from today.
Yeah, we're all babies still.
That's what I mean. It's
You
like
know?
we like, how do we know?
Well, I'm
Dude? The
just
longest
thinking
I've
like,
stored years is like 10 years, I think, is the longest. Maybe I got some that are maybe a little bit longer, but that is that really a long term? Is that long? 10,
yeah.
15, 20 years? Is that really long?
But then how old was the seed itself? Because like I'm thinking like with
I would
flour.
assume within
So
a year. I would assume when I bought
yeah,
them.
when you got it. That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking. So how old
Yeah.
it is when you get it and then storage. So like with flour, oxidization is an issue. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
You got like enzymes essentially are going to break down. So I'm wondering with seeds, and I don't know the science. Somebody in the chat let us know. I'm sure there is science to it. But like the effect of the air is just going to be an issue with like the enzymes within the seed itself, which could ruin the viability of germination or the strength of the seed itself. Like that's some things that the argument of having a storage specifically just for your genetics is huge. When you look at people who have seed vaults that essentially are like optimized like a wine cellar or like a humidor for cigars. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very dialed in, and I think that'll be the future. I think more people are going to think about preservation, and they're going to have, if you got a cooler essentially for drying your bud these days for $1,000 or more, 3,000 if you're in Germany, shout out to you. Why would you not have something for your seeds, you know, to keep them long term? It's got me thinking more and more that maybe I should get on that path. So I can't pop all these seeds. I have so many. I'm becoming a seed hoarder.
Yep. Good. I don't think anybody can add anything additional to that.
Okay, good. Well, store the seeds, and that's another thing. So now let's get back to storing of the clones. So we've got 12 genetics we're growing. You know, I can grow 12 plants, 12 clones on each of these. Am I going to have 12 mother plants? Or how do you guys you're having your keepers? It's like the only way logically for me now is if I have seed stock that are guaranteed to be the same ones, or I've got tissue culture. But I'm have to killing, like literally I'm going to kill off all of the FTS Swank collab ones that I don't like and all of the headbangers that I don't like because I don't have the space to maintain 12 different genetics as clones. Once just to see if I like it, and then I'm holding on to it. But it's like you take that clone, you got 8 to 12 weeks of flower. So you're growing a plant now. You no longer have a clone that you have 12 full plants that have been vegging for 8 to 12 weeks. So how do you guys go about it? Do you cull the herd or do you run that next one through and then decide?
For me in the FTS collaboration, FTS Swank collaboration, I want the best of the best. I was talking to a breeder that said he calls it if it doesn't have a taproot over X number of half inches or whatever. He says if it doesn't have an inch of a taproot on it, he calls it. And for me, I was like, oh, you know, well, right. But then when I describe my selection process and I say, well, if it grows too tall and it's too lanky, I don't want it. It's the way it is. And someone who doesn't really care about structure is like, you know, it's all about the smoke. It's all about the smoke. Yes, but as a home grower, for me, it's not all about the smoke. I'm not working hard for something that's just going to produce the smoke that I've grown in a genetic that grew really well and smoked very similarly. There's just the diversity of genetics out there is so large that I personally want to check all the boxes of home growing before I get to the smoke too. Of course, the smoke is the final say because you can check all 7 boxes, but by the time you get to smoke, it sucks. Well, crumple that one up. She's gone, right? So it's like, but then again, you can have maybe a couple boxes missing and the smoke is amazing and you might still want to try to make that work or try to preserve it by breeding it in with something else that will make it a lot more stable so that you can guarantee consistency. So for me, it's, you know, it's a multitude of boxes that needs to be checked before I get to the smoke. I had a Pheno 3. For me, it not only had a tall structure, it had a citrus terp. I can't really get rid of that citrus terp, in my opinion. I could, but it would take a lot of work. So she's gone. It's just gone. I'm not going to work harder than I have to when it comes to preserving the genetics that speak to me.
For me, it's you know, if I have a bunch of clones and it's like, how do I preserve these? Well, I'm turning them into mother plants. They're mother plants at that point, and I'm figuring out, okay, And there are so many different ways to kind of store mother plants, right? Keep mother plants around. Some people, I think the most common way is like soil. People will just put the plant into soil, they'll let it grow out. But you can either go with small containers or you can go with larger containers. I know there are several folks out there that are like, I want it in a 7-gallon, I want it in a 10-gallon, I want it in a 15-gallon container. And then I'm going to keep that mother plant so that way I can grow it large and I can take clones off it when I want to take it. There are other people on the opposite side of things where I have smaller grow spaces. Like I have had mother plants in 1-gallon containers before, multiple 1-gallon containers with mother plants. Now, sure, the plant is going to grow up like crazy, and eventually you're going to have to prune it in some way, right? You're going to take clones off it, or you're just going to prune it and compost the stuff that you don't use, right? But you're maintaining that plant to be a small plant, a small mother plant. So I think there's some misconceptions about people thinking that mother plants have to be in a large container. Definitely don't need to be. Now, when you're keeping in a small container, just be aware that if you're in a plastic container, it can easily get root bound, right? They just wrap around. You could come across problems despite you giving enough nutrients in there. You could see deficiencies happen on the plant. I have done root pruning manually before where I take it out of the actual 1-gallon container, take a knife and cut all sides of that. So basically cutting all the roots off and then putting it back into a 1-gallon container with fresh soil around it and letting it regrow. Like there are so many different ways you can go about it. That may not be the best way to go about it. And some people be like, wow, you're crazy for doing that. But that is a technique that's online that people do. So I figured I'd mention it. But yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, it's a little bit easier to have a little bit larger of a container. That way you're not struggling trying to keep the thing healthy when it's root bound, for example. Maybe you want to use a fabric container instead of a plastic container. So yeah, there are various ways to go about it. I think it really depends on what's your growth space, what's your overall goals as well. Are you do you only have a couple mother plants? Well, you could probably get away with larger containers and keeping that in your growth space and not running out of space for other plants. Or yeah, I'm just rambling on at this point, but you go with the large containers or small containers.
No, you made a really good point too, and the thing is too is that Mr. Grow It knows what you did last summer.
Classic.
Yeah,
Classic.
Hey, just the way you're cutting open the pot and the roots.
I do. I'm the same as Chris. Like he actually nailed it right on what I used to do. Like when I used to clone, I would like start a mother plant like right say a month into winter in my house, and then I would grow that one plant though, and I would just shape it for like a while till it was this nice little bush. I would train it, do some low stress training on it in a big pot. It was a little pot. I would always use like a pretty much of a bigger size pot. And then right, like say like a couple weeks before the spring came, we just strip that plant, clones. That's how we would do it. And then I just go plant my clones right when it was time to plant outside. Just throw out like 40, 50 clones everywhere. So yeah, that's how we did it, man. Just shape a nice mother plant, keep it small, a nice small place, and then eventually you'll be able to pick off a lot of clones off that girl. And it's nicer, like what Rob said earlier, when it's like when the plant is healthy. Like I found that it was easier to clone when a plant was like already like a mature mother plant, right? Like the stems are kind of stocky. I look for like 3 nodes on each branch, snip it there, and just keep going. So there's a few bud sites on each of my little branches. That was the main thing I'd go for. Sometimes I would like find that my lower branches had a little bit of a longer node spacing to them. So those clones would actually be stretchier plants than my top clones that I would pick. The node spacing is shorter on the top of the plant. So those clones would actually be shorter clones. So I started learning like, I'm going to put these shorter ones on this side of the field, and I'll put the lower clones from my mother plant on this side of the field where it's like, they're going to be real tall and stretchy. Right. So that was a bit of my experience.
That's a good point, man. I've noticed that too. That's what I was saying before. You start with that thick top and it's this thick, hardy plant and it's girthy. When you have a fully grown mother plant to clone from versus a small plant that you're taking clones from, you're starting better. I feel you're working your way further. And not just that, you most likely have put the other plant through so you can see it in flower, what it's going to be like and how it's going to smoke before you go and clone it all that. Because right now I'm to the point where I wish I would have saw a little bit more on the morphology on a few before I flipped them to flower, because I took the clones like 2 weeks before I went into flower thinking I'll give recovery time instead of them being a mother plant where I'm not thinking about that. It's hardy and good. And I'm taking that knowing that this is just something I'm using to take clones from. But then a lot of people I see kill their mother plants off. I'm a proponent of flowering it out It's a big, massive beast. Some people say they don't do well, but I've gotten my biggest yields off mother plants. They're huge. Just got to make sure you're doing like Troy said and train them, take care of them first, and don't just put this mangled, hacked, poor mother who's been through the ringer in there. She's just like a dog that's been bred too much. It's messed up. Don't do that to them.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I like the idea of flowering it out. I feel sorry for anyone that puts their mother plant in a small pot, because you're going to be watering her sometimes twice a day. If you're not in a minimum 5, I'm thinking like you're going to be watering that thing every single day, and you're going to have a mother plant around for a long time. Personally, I feel like you dial back your feeding is going to allow you to preserve her the longest. That way, you're not giving her full amounts of food, so you're promoting too much growth, but she's not dying either. So you kind of either like dial back the nutrients anywhere between 50 to 20 to 50%. That way, you're kind of just keeping her on a nice stable line. Cooler temperatures also work as well. Everything you can do to slow her down is really the ideal, because even though you're going to be taking clones and you're going to be trying to keep her small, she is continually growing, and her stalk will get thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, and she will get taller and taller and taller depending on how often you're taking clones off her. So yeah, training her right, feeding her right, definitely making sure that you're giving her the best opportunity to just plateau rather than grow or die. And I think, for the record, I totally misunderstood the question when I rambled on about my 5. Yeah.
It's okay. You
'Cause
still had a
came
good
back.
value.
Yeah, Chris came back and I was like, "Oh, I totally misunderstood the question." All right, go ahead, Chris.
It's good.
One other thing I was going to say is one thing, lighting as well. People reduce the lighting for mothers. I just figured I mentioned that one. Some people don't go over 400 ppfd, for example, on their mothers. So
Yeah, I think it's a good point too, because you don't want it to die, but you don't want it to flourish. You want it to be healthy, but you don't want it to explode. Healthy but not hardy per se. It's a hard balance, man. Learning to keep that plant, especially if it's in the same space as your other plants that you're vegging. So if you don't have a dedicated area for your mothers, your other plants may suffer just a little bit. So it's one of those deals where like you may not want to do that. You may want to go clone for clone for clone, but then how do you have a keeper? So I think this episode kind of laid that out, kind of all of our ways, our approaches, and some different options for people if you are looking for something to preserve these genetics. And if you're looking for good genetics, obviously Seedsman's got your back. Discount code sessions. Because there's multiple.
That's right. I think I think the reality is as science kind of evolves and home growers become more educated and passionate about their craft, I think the reality of preserving genetics is going to be like that next level of growth for home growers, because we have all found it. We have found those ones where it's like, yes, please. I would have actually taken more of that and lost it due to time itself. So I think as time goes on, we're going to see people utilizing tissue culture, for example, to maintain genetics at a mass scale. And I'm excited about it. Bring it on.
Oh,
Yeah, man, like that Athena kit can hold 1,000 cuts, I think, 1,000 cultivars in your laboratory or your
be our
library.
guinea pig, dude, and get it and try it.
Buck, you're looking at a buck a cultivar.
And how long can you? How long do they last in there? Do you guys know anyone off the top of their head?
Tissue culture is indefinitely.
You may have to change the vials every so often, but yeah, dude, people, it's if you don't go to the rooting side of things it's just preservation, which is crazy. It's like there's a step process where you go, and this is from my understanding. We'll have to have an expert on this one, but going from taking the piece of tissue, putting it into the gel, putting it into a separate gel for rooting, and then hardening it off. So if you stop at a certain point, we're just in preservation, and that's where I think you can store your
question
genetics.
for you. So, because like I am completely new on this, obviously. So say once you preserve it and everything, how do you then grow that piece of like preserved tissue? Like how do you start that as a plant one day?
That's where you go into the rooting side of things. You go out of preservation into a rooting gel, and then they'll start to grow out from that. And then that's where you start to harden it off as an actual plant, and it'll have roots, and you can plant it into a container. A lot of people go with rock wool because it's easy to kind of slowly build the roots up through there. But, most of us home growers may have a different method. But I guess if you're going sterile, maybe Rockwool would be the way to go.
Yeah, at least to start it off, and then you can just take a cut off that plant eventually,
Yeah,
and put
and
it
then
back
boom,
in
you
you
have
and
it back.
save that. Man,
Yeah.
you know what? That is pretty cool, man. Like imagine having fucking 500 or 1,000
on a shelf, dude. On a
That
shelf.
could be worth
like
money
in a
one day, you
backpack.
know?
Not a
Like, if you
garage, not a
started that
warehouse.
now, by the time we're 70 or something, we could probably sell that for fucking thousands. You can be like, I have shit from 2025 in here, man.
All
They'd
you
be
gotta
like,
do is
what?
put it through rooting, and it's ready to go. Like that's
People are doing
yeah,
that with seeds right now, dude.
Oh,
and
for
if somebody
sure.
Right?
knows more
Yeah.
than we do on this subject, please let us know below in the comment section. Maybe we'll talk more about it, because tissue culture is something that I touched the surface on because I was just a director. I wasn't the person touching the tissue culture. So it was fascinating to see, because I walked in like, what the hell, Yante? And then I was like, what kind of Dexter's laboratory shit's going on in here? Where'd the clones go? And they're like, oh, that whole top shelf is just tissue culture. I was like, damn, so how are the genetics gone? They're like, no, all 30 are right up in that little box right there. I was like, what? 30 genetics in a box? It's crazy, man.
Because tissue culture isn't new. It's just new to
Mhm.
cannabis. Like,
well,
right?
it's
We've
new to
been
us home
like,
growers, especially.
isn't there a sheep or a goat named Molly that was grown from a petri dish
I
somewhere in
believe so.
Scotland or Ireland? Yeah, and she is
Or a
GMO.
pig.
She's just a straight petri dish baby.
Damn.
Came from tissue culture, if I'm not mistaken. So it's an amazing world that we live in
Science,
today.
dude.
We are playing God. Dun dun dun.
Oh, God.
There's a sentence for you. That'll get us canceled. But a huge
Yeah.
shout out to Seedsman for putting us on this week. We really appreciate it. If you're checking out anything and you're looking for some great genetics to preserve, you can head on over to Seedsman and check them out. You can use promo code SESSIONS to save a few dollars off at checkout while you're looking for quality genetics. What a great
Absolutely.
episode today, boys.
It was an
Yeah, it was
absolute
awesome.
banger, and an honor to be able to chat with you boys. Looking forward to the next one. That being said, my name is Rob CLTV. It's Mr. Grow It, Pigeons 420, Northern Scrogger. We'll see you guys next time. See ya.
See you later.
Peace.